Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Eric Onerheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show.
Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to TypeScript FM.
Hey. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing all right.
Good.
I had my brother's bachelor party this last weekend. Very tame. We're all mid to late 30s, so our body can't cash many checks anymore. So we went go-karting and axe throwing.
Nice.
And my arms and shoulders still hurt.
From the axe throwing or from the go-karts?
The go-karts don't have power steering, so you really had to wrench on them.
Okay.
But it's unclear which caused my arms and shoulders to hurt. You really did have to, really try hard. Those go-karts go fast. They go 50 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And you're on this little track, and you're drifting around.
If I was going to make a bet, I would say it's the go-karts, probably not the axe throwing.
Yeah, the axe throwing is pretty low-key.
Mm-hmm. Did you get any bullseyes?
I did a couple. Certainly, I am not an axe throwing expert, which I think is probably a good thing. It's a lot like bowling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of the games that you play with it's very similar to bowling, I'd say.
Yep, that makes sense. We did axe throwing for a holiday party, and they had little games you could play.
Mm-hmm.
So, and one of them was Jeopardy, where you had to throw at different letters to unlock them, which is pretty cool.
That's a cool idea. Yeah. I mean, I have 0% accuracy, so any letters I unlocked would be pure accident.
Yeah, they would be random. Yeah, that's pretty much what happened with us. Yeah.
It's I want to buy a vowel. Just kidding. I also, Gestures at Universe needed a pick-me-up, so I went and just noodled on SDF text in Excalibur, which is signed distance field text. It's a technique that Valve introduced in the early 2000s for rendering text cheaply in video games using signed distance fields and shaders. And it's cool. It's a really nice way to do text, and it's really fast for our particular type of drawing. So when I have that done, text will be ripping fast. So we'll be able to do a lot of cool stuff. I'm playing around with using Unplugin to make a Vite build plugin for generating the SDF atlases given a font file. So you give it a TTF. It'll take that, generate the atlas that gets provided to the SDF shader to draw the text. So that's pretty cool.
I think for our listeners, an unplugin is pretty cool, right? Because it can support different types of bundlers and build tools with a single plugin.
Yeah, so you can at the same time, you can hit Webpack, RSPack, Vite, ESBuild, roll up, roll down. You kind of hit all of them at once. So whatever your favorite bundler is, Unplugin probably supports it.
Nice. That's sweet.
So that'll be cool. So I'm playing around with that. That's kind of just a fun project.
Nice.
We had a really fun dinner with one of our local contributors, Chad. We went to a local pub and had a good time and almost closed down the place on Sunday, which was really nice. Yep. It was a lot of fun. It was great
fun
to talk to not toddlers.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, it was nice to get out and just hang out.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, what's up with you? What's going on?
Well, last week I sat down for a couple nights and I used RS Doctor, which is part of the RS Pack family of tools, to audit my bundle for Keep Track of My Games for this new feature that I'm releasing. So it's not available to everybody yet. So I wanted to make sure that I tried to optimize it a bit before releasing it more generally. And if you can believe it, I cut it by 50%, the bundle size.
Nice.
On the initial load. And most of the problem was with a specific vendor who shall not be named, who has a 6 megabyte, basically a sub app in their bundle. And it was just being served to everybody, but it was only being used on one page. So,
yeah.
So I split that out. So I used the code splitting technique to split that out into its own chunk. Load it asynchronously, which it already needed to be loaded asynchronously in the first place anyway. Mm-hmm. So that was a pretty natural thing. And then I had upgraded I upgraded all the build tooling basically. So updated core.js, updated a browser list, and all this stuff that does all the polyfills and things like that. And then I also consolidated a whole bunch of the entry points because it was duplicating shared code across each of the bundles. And so you go to a new page, you download the new bundle. It's basically mostly all the same code. So yeah, so doing that just shared a ton of code, like 4 megabytes of code.
You'll get some cache wins there too, because that shared code can be cached on the browser.
Yep, exactly. So anyway, it went from 40 megabytes to 22 megabytes, and that's the raw source size in development. And then in production with gzipping, it went from 858 kilobytes to 650 kilobytes. So shaved off a whole 200K on that. Yeah.
Not nothing.
Nope, not nothing. I will take it. Cool. All right. Well, we should get on to the news for the week of January 5th. We got some big news to start with. The headliner. Do you want to take it away?
Yes. Fusion has arrived. And by that, I mean the Node.js security releases that have been teased for quite a while are now out. So they're kind of spooky. A few of them are a little spooky. The most alarming is the first CVE on their blog post, which allows a timing attack on buffer and uint8 arrays to potentially leak non-zero filled data out of uint8 arrays or buffers. This is spooky because it could contain leftover data from previous operations, like secrets, like keys, for example, get loaded into buffers like this all the time. Secrets, tokens, passwords, or maybe best case data corruption. So it's a pretty spooky one. However, it does require some precise timing to exploit or in-process code execution. So you probably would need to pair this with another exploit in order to really make use of this. It's still not great. It's kind of like in that same vein of like the Heartbleed situation where you're leaking memory, but this is not as bad. It requires a little more effort to exploit. They've backported this to all of the active release lines, and that's true of all of these releases that vulnerabilities we're going to talk about. So that's 20, 22, 24, and 25. Those have been backported. You should update today.
Yes, immediately.
You should update today. The other two highs are not as wild. The first one, I guess the second high, is a bypass of the file system permissions using crafted symlinks. So this allows code to write to files. Let's see. A flaw in Node.js's permissions model allows attackers to bypass allow fs read and fs write restrictions using crafted relative symlink paths. By chaining directories and symlinks, a script granted access to the current directory can escape the allowed path and read sensitive files. Not great. Etsy shadow. Let's go.
Yep.
So you do want to update for this. This is definitely huge. And then the last high on there is the HTTP2 server crashes with unhandled errors when receiving malformed headers frame. And this is more of a denial of service. So instead of safely closing the connection, the process crashes, enabling remote denial of service. Less bad. If you have a WAF, you could potentially guard against this until you patch. Web Application Firewall. That's what WAF stands for. And then the rest are bad. They're mediums or lows. A lot of them are denial of service type attacks. So there's a maximum call stack, exceeded error via async hooks, leading to process crashes. So that one's not great. There is a memory leak that enables remote denial of service when processing TLS client certificates. Also not great. There's two more mediums that I forgot about. So there's one denial of service still, which is TLS, another TLS callback exception bypass error handlers that causes a denial of service, and a file descriptor leak. If you've ever had that on a server, it's really annoying. Basically, your server is dead in the water because all of these file descriptors are used up in the operating system. You can't open any new files or write any new files. Basically makes your server DOA and you need to reboot. And then the last medium is a Node.js permission model bypass, which allows Unix domain socket connections to bypass network restrictions when permission is enabled, even without allow net. Attacker-controlled inputs can connect to arbitrary local sockets via net TLS on DC fetch. This breaks intended security boundary of the permission model. So yeah, not great. And then the last one is a low, which allows a code to update the timestamp on files even when it's not supposed to be able to. Yay! Update your node. Update it now.
So the actual exact versions that you need to update to would be 20.20.0, 22.22.0, 24.13, and 25.3.
Mm-hmm.
So just as a reminder, 24 is the LTS, and 22 is in maintenance, but so still supported, and then 20 as well is still being maintained. And then 25 is the latest non-LTS release. So if you're on any of those, if you're using a node version manager like NVM or FNM, make sure you update your local versions too, not just your production versions.
Mm-hmm.
And then, give some instructions to all your team members. Make sure they're all updated.
That's right. These are not great. And definitely make sure that your Docker images are up to date in your CI/CD as well. So you're not deploying vulnerable versions of Node.
Yep. One other tip too, I'm using FNM. I don't know if you are too.
I am.
Yeah, so I alias the LTS release, like with the default alias.
Cool.
And so today I just updated it to make sure that it's aliasing the security fix release as the default, because that you can add safely to your path, and then all the tools on your local development system will use that alias as the default, because otherwise with FNM, it has like a kind of like a random code or like a timestamp code in the folder name, which is really hard to add to your path because it updates anytime you switch versions. So if you add the default alias to your path environment variable, just make sure that you update the alias so that it's pointing to the latest releases.
I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
That's a blog post right there.
Yeah, so that's just using the FNM alias default and then the version that you want to set as the default.
I'm going to do that right after this show.
Cool. Yep. So that's what I just did before the show. All right. So that's pretty much the major news this week. There are some meta framework news items. So in Astro, they put out a cool community blog post called the 2025 Year in Review. This was written by a contributor, not the Astro team, not the Astro core team directly. It's pretty cool. So it just goes through all the stuff that they released in Astro. So if you just want a concise one blog post explanation of everything that's been going on in the Astro ecosystem, you can go check that out.
Yeah, no, a lot of cool stuff in Astro over the last year.
Yes.
It's definitely something that I have looked at and considered quite a bit as like an ideal meta framework, because it allows you to do a lot of stuff. If I'm not mistaken, a lot of stuff around like picking your front end spa thingy of choice, which is nice. So you can do like web components, as far as I know. You can do Svelte, you can do Angular, you can do React. So like, I think I could be wrong about that. As I understand it, it gives you a lot of choice on what you can do.
Yep. Yeah. You can choose what you want to use for like the islands and things like that. So there's tons of integrations. And then Void Zero put out another What's New in ViteLand blog post for December 2025. So we've already covered all the stuff that it talks about in previous episodes. But again, if you just want a concise 1 month summary of all the latest releases like Oxy and ESLint and all that type of stuff, then go check out that blog post.
Next, I have ESLint 853, which adds a new rule, which has been a huge paper cut for me. Excuse me, not a new rule. It adds a new fixer for the rule unused imports so that it can just fix it instead of just bombing.
Yeah.
Which is going to be so nice for my life, because this is regularly what I accidentally do in CI, and my GitHook can't clean it up. So this will just make my life like a measurable percentage point better. Yeah, ESLint 853. Check it out.
Nice. That is very nice. I did come across a library, hat tip to Reddit. This is called Typique, and it's a bundler agnostic zero runtime CSS in TypeScript library. Okay, so hold on a second. What does that mean? So you're probably familiar with CSS-in-TS, which is like styled components, right? Or even like a vanilla extract. So it lets you write your CSS just, in scope of your JavaScript components and reference them, right? But there's been a sort of evolution within the CSS tooling ecosystem to do zero runtime CSS in JS, which means normally, like with styled components, it has to inject a whole bunch of code to like use the styles at runtime, which can add to your bundle size and like significantly can add to your bundle size. And I know this because we used to use it at Target, and that was one of the big performance issues that we ran into. With vanilla extract, it goes a step further and it takes all the generated CSS and then puts it into dedicated CSS files. So they're just plain CSS. So there's a lot less runtime overhead for that. Now, Typique goes a little bit of a step further, and it poses the question, what if instead of writing your CSS in JavaScript, you write it in types, in the type system, so that they evaporate at runtime? And it's quite interesting. So it still produces CSS, but that's done through a build plugin, through a TypeScript plugin. It generates the CSS for you. And so as you're typing and saving your files, it uses TSC under the hood to extract the CSS that you're writing. And you do it through like a CSS utility type, and you can say like satisfies my CSS type, and you're still writing it as an object, and you're using type syntax and string literals. So it still feels like you're writing CSS and JS because it is using object syntax, but it's definitely not like writing plain CSS. So it's one approach. It's pretty interesting. I think we'll see.
I might try it.
Yeah, I mean, you should.
I love
try
and
it.
hate it at the same time. I mean, it kind of feels like the archetype regex kind of way of doing things. So you can get like type hints here that you would normally get kind of in the browser developer tools in like Chrome or Firefox when you're like, trying to figure out which flexbox property is again, and you're just cycling through them. This feels kind of like the same thing where you'll get autocomplete for your CSS authoring, but it's powered by types, which feels like it could be super awesome. It also could be super horrible. We'll find out. I'll try it out.
Yeah, you can go take a look at the examples that they have in the examples directory, because there's plenty of things you can take a look at. It does bend your mind a little bit, though. But I mean, it's also can be the same with like CSS and JS also.
Yeah. When you brought this up to me, I was like, I hate it. And then I started looking at the README and I'm like, I'm kind of coming around. I'm looking at this rounded button class in their example. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I think it's just worth like trying out in a playground and like seeing how it feels. There is some funky syntax to do like styles that apply to the component and not like as a class, where you do like empty array and then you do like satisfies this CSS. So it applies it to the whole component, not just a specific class name. And that kind of syntax is a little bit weird because it's basically just a dangling array inside of your JavaScript, which is a little bit weird. So, but I think it did remind me of archetype immediately. And I thought that maybe that was an inspiration or could be an inspiration for some of the syntax. Because I think what I would love in my little wish list is that could I have this, but also just be writing regular CSS? Because I don't love using the JS name properties for like CSS. I would prefer to write, natural CSS properties and CSS rules. And then, I'm not sure how the cascade works with this, but I think that would be interesting to take a look at.
Who needs a cascade?
It's part of the C in CSS.
No, I just want style sheet. No C.
That's the eternal religious debate in the community. We're not going to get into that. I'm a fan of the cascade, but
All
okay.
right.
Let's get on to the community highlights. There's some cool stuff that went on this past week.
Yeah. The first thing that you pointed out to me was the zoo.js.org, which is the JavaScript engine zoo, which gives you a bunch of micro benchmarks around the various JavaScript engines out there. And they have a pretty comprehensive list. And I'm impressed because there's a lot of them on here that I thought weren't very well known, but it's pretty well represented for, obviously the big three like JavaScript Core, V8, and SpiderMonkey are up there. But Hermes of React Native is up there. The various flavors of QuickJS are up there. Porfor is even up there as well that we've talked about. Even more esoteric JavaScript engines like JerryScript are up there, which I think is awesome. And they give you some benchmarks. Again, they're dirty lies, and you should trust them as far as you can throw them, because benchmark is not your production code. So you should always measure your code and your use case before choosing anything at all. A benchmark, your production code is not. But the thing that really surprised me, certainly, is that JavaScript core is at the top of this list. And I did not expect that at all. I expected something very different. Let's just put it that way. I'm not gonna reveal my hand, but they did extremely well in a lot of these categories, a lot of these benchmarks that they're doing, which is wild to me. That's not what I would have expected.
Yep. Number 4 on that list, by the way, is Graal.js, which Sam joined us from the Elide runtime team. And that's what they're using behind the scenes for their polyglot runtime. They're using Graal VM, but part of that is Graal.js, which is by Oracle, but it's open source.
In fact, Graal, I think, has the number 1 spot on several of these micro benchmarks, just not as good across the board as JavaScript Core or V8, which are the top 2 spots.
Yep. And also as a reminder, Bun runtime is built on JavaScript Core. So they're piggybacking off all those performance improvements too.
And I have to wonder if there's some upstreaming happening as well, because they're doing a lot of performance-oriented development. I wonder if they're pushing changes upstream into WebKit JavaScript Core as well.
Could be. All right. So this I saw on Blue Sky. Someone recommended it and was like, this article is amazing. And it was also top of Hacker News. It's called Logging Sucks, and it's just loggingsucks.com. And it's just the one article. But what's cool about it is that it's an interactive article, and it goes into a lot of detail about how you're doing logging wrong and what you should do instead. And there's some really great insights in here. I think the number 1 takeaway for me is to focus on wide events. And what do they mean by that? And this is by Boris. And Boris says that instead of treating your logging as like a journal of your debugging, just log significant events at the end of the request with all the context you need to answer questions. Because logging should be about answering questions. And without the right context, you're going to be looking through all your logs and you can't figure out what's going on. And he does go through why OpenTelemetry is not the answer. This is not going to save you, because OpenTelemetry can group all your logging together, but that's still not going to, it's still up to you to architect your logs in such a way that you can answer the right questions. So anyway, that was my takeaway. And so now I'm thinking to myself, I should be logging wide events with as much context as possible.
Yeah, I think structured logging can help you here.
Yes.
And not use necessarily string logging. I think structured logging is definitely a thing to look at, because it allows you to do a lot more observability on your logs than grepping through your logs, which is, anytime, honestly, lately, I've been quoted saying this, if you've opened up a log file, you've already failed.
Yes.
So your telemetry is not telling you the right information if you have to open up a log file.
Yep.
So
you should, the most eye-opening part of the article is when you scroll down to what context should you include to answer the right questions. And it has a checklist. And so you have to figure out what context should you add to the login event in order to answer all these different questions. And then you can kind of see in action how much data you should actually be logging. So anyway, it's a very, very good article. You should go check it out.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I'll underscore in this article is they talk about what kind of sampling that you do. And tail sampling is my preferred, which means after you make a sampling decision after all of the request is complete. So versus head sampling, which has less of an impact on your runtime behavior, right? Because you decide at the start of the request whether or not you're going to record this event or this request. And this is the same in OpenTelemetry as well. But tail sampling says, okay, what happened in this request? Should we keep it? And usually what you want is you keep 100% of errors. So any kind of error you keep. You always keep things that are slow. You always keep, maybe you always keep specific user requests, paying users, for example, and then you have some sample rate because it's too expensive to record every event in your system. Trust me.
Yep, exactly. You don't know how many times I keep getting you've used up all of your quota for your logging for application insights, which is what I use. Okay. Next article, a blog post. It's an engineering post from the creator of Optique, which we talked about recently, which is a CLI parser that uses TypeScript types for all the options parsing and creation. And it's a blog post titled Designing Type-Safe Sync Async Mode Support in TypeScript. It's super interesting because it goes deep into how do you combine both async parsing and sync parsing with the same CLI options. Because some of your CLI options will need to do async work, but some of them need to be synchronous. So how do you prevent the async stuff, poisoning the well or, being viral and infecting the rest of your CLI options so that you don't have promises everywhere? So it's a really cool blog post that goes deep into that and how they achieved it with Optique.
This is so cool.
Yeah.
I'm gonna read this very carefully.
Yeah, it's a good one. Next up, from How to Test Frontend, why you should start using projects in Vitest configuration. So we do this in Excalibur, where we have multiple Vitest projects to represent the unit tests, the visual tests, and then you can run them separately. So this blog post goes into how you can set that up and why that's probably a good idea, depending on your setup.
It is an extremely good idea because our visual tests take a long time to run because they necessarily are drawing. And anytime you're drawing, you got to spin up a browser and you got to spin up like graphics and you got to actually like execute a graphics pipeline. And you want to do that in isolation. So you're doing it like for every test, which really hurts for performance. But our unit test can really rip because it's just testing logic and it doesn't need to draw anything. The next one was via Michael Hongmin on Blue Sky, the Concise TypeScript book written by Simone Poggiali. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I cannot pronounce it correctly. Anyway, this is a great resource, I think, on top of like the TypeScript Handbook, because the author here has really gone to great lengths to just explain in like plain English what all of the various features of TypeScript are. And one of the things that was really useful was, let me see if I can find it, the never type, explaining the never type and then talking about exhaustive checks and explaining why it works. And this is extremely concise, literally. The name of this book is the Concise TypeScript book. It's extremely concise and extremely easy to follow. So like if you're like, I think I need to do some configuration of TypeScript, I wonder what options I have. If you're looking at compiler options and you wonder what they are, this is also an extremely good resource because it explains what each compiler option is in detail and what it means. So one of the ones that I was looking at, I was like, I don't know if I actually understand what ES module interop means. And here it's like in plain English, this allows to import default from common JS modules that do not export using default property. Awesome. That's great. That I understand what ES module interop does now.
Yep.
Because like if you read that, it doesn't say anything about common JS or defaults in that option. And this is a fantastic resource. So I will have this on my bookmarks bar and I'll be referencing this very frequently, I think.
Yep. That's right.
Dimitri, friend of the show, was just on syntax.fm talking about TypeSlayer, his new tool, and Doom in TypeScript types, which was an awesome watch. I'm really glad that Dimitri was able to get onto Syntax and talk about it. You should watch it as well. It's awesome.
Cool stuff. I saw similarly a DevTools FM interview on Storybook modernization, and it just goes through how Storybook has evolved through every version from, the early days when I think we were using Storybook 3 or Storybook 4 at work, and now they're on Storybook 15 or something like that. So it just goes through how their build tools have evolved and how the product has evolved. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely check that out. DevTools.fm, by the way, great podcast to listen to. They're really great. Next, Jake Bailey's GopherCon talk is now published. So if you want to learn more about TypeScript in Go, watch that because he really does dive deep into the weeds on the how and the why and the what. So if you really want to learn more about porting TypeScript to Go, check this out.
I have a question about that because it was out when he came onto the podcast, wasn't it? Because I watched it.
Yeah, I think it was on the live stream because we had to zip to the right spot.
You're right.
And now this is just a standalone video. And this is just a standalone video now that is on the YouTube. So it's very searchable.
Perfect.
versus like, here, go to this time code on this live stream. Next thing on my list was Things.viz, which is kind of a cool little tool built in Dino to visualize your Things3 to-do lists. So if you're using the Things3 to-do list tool, it stores all of its stuff in a SQLite database in the backend. And this little tool will let you do like quick little visualizations of your Things3 tasks. So you can be like, all right, how am I doing? And there's a cool little chart that you can draw spark lines over time. And I just thought it was pretty neat. And it might be an example that you can take and run with if you need to do like a little quick viz tool locally for whatever you're doing, especially if you're hitting a SQLite database. But this is just kind of like another, I don't know, check in the win column for Dino for building like quick, fast, typed CLI tools.
Nice. We do have a Bleet of the week. It's not going to translate as well over audio, but Joaquim Vide posts on Blue Sky, open your eyes. And there's two charts. And on the first chart, it's Preact.js downloads over time. And it's like an exponential graph. And then the bottom graph is UFO sightings over time. And it matches the same curve.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, this was pretty hilarious. In the Discord, I was posting a lot of I want to believe memes.
All right. I do have a secret of the handbook segment today. I'm going to quiz you right on here on the spot, Eric.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the difference between setting experimental decorators true in your TS config versus stage 3 decorators?
I, in theory, do. I don't know what the underlying implementation does.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. I don't know if we'll go into that amount of detail because I haven't even looked at that really myself. But I was confused, as was someone else on Blue Sky, that you don't have to enable experimental decorators anymore if you want to use decorators. So what I learned is that prior to TypeScript 5, the experimental decorators was Microsoft's, TypeScript's implementation of decorators support. So it didn't quite follow the stage 3 spec because the stage 3 spec changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're using TypeScript version 4 or before, if you want to use decorators, you do have to turn that setting on. However, if you're using TypeScript 5, they implemented the stage 3 decorator proposal natively now. So you do not need experimental decorators. In fact, if you turn that on, you're going to run into problems if you're trying to use the latest decorator stuff. And I do have a blog post that does do a deep dive into how it's all implemented and the differences between the two approaches. But the long and short of it is that it's easy to use decorators today with TypeScript 5. You don't have to do any extra configuration.
Mm-hmm.
So it really just depends on the runtime you're trying to target and whether they support decorators. But with TSC itself, you can use stage 3 decorators, and that's a separate thing than the legacy decorators for experimental decorators true.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're curious, the history here, if I understand it correctly, Google was building their new version of Angular, and they were prototyping a language called AppScript, which was very similar to TypeScript, but with decorators. And they teamed up, and they maybe got cart before the horse syndrome and came up with a decorator ahead of TC39, so that TypeScript was the new language of Angular. But it turns out that was a mistake, and now we have this kind of odd artifact that only works in TypeScript versus the TC39 standard.
Right. Yes. Cool. Well, you've got some cool links to share?
I was doing a lot of game dev over the last week, and one of our Discord members suggested taking a look at transparenttextures.com, which is a great way to add tiling backgrounds on top of colors. So it really gives you a lot of variety on top of like whatever you're doing in like a game. Like if you needed to have a background that tiles and that doesn't look bad, this is just kind of a great resource for free tiling textures that you can use in like game dev, or maybe in your blog, or any design that you need to have like a background that is maybe more interesting. So definitely check that out. And then the other one, which I was looking at because I'm recording video, is freetouse.com. And they have a whole bunch of cool stuff. And I specifically am a fan of the lo-fi music tracks for like technical videos because it's not distracting. You can have the volume turned down really low and it still has some, audio interest to keep you engaged. And so they have a whole ton of free lo-fi music that you can just use royalty free.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, that's always kind of hard to find. You're like, what? I want to use some music or sound effects, but like, I would like it to be free, for like a hobby project. So freetouse.com, I'll have to bookmark that. I have one cool link. So if you have kids and they get to the age where they enjoy music, like my kids do, you might be trying to figure out, like, we don't have iPod shuffles anymore. We don't even have regular iPods anymore. Maybe you could resurrect one and get it working. Or like I have a Zune player and that still works. But like what I would love is a way to basically just reuse my Spotify account because I have a family account and all the music that they want to listen to is already there, but I don't want to give them a phone. So we talked to some friends and they said, hey, you should check out Mighty 3. So it's a music player that connects with Spotify. So basically, you just give it the playlist that you want to have your kid listen to, and it syncs it to the device. And I think it can sync like 100,000 songs or something like that, or 10,000 songs. I don't know. Plenty of songs. And so that's a pretty nice way to do it. And it looks like an iPod shuffle, which is pretty fun. So it has physical buttons. There's no screen. So yeah, I think we might be getting one of those in the future. We already do like a analog. We have a CD player for the girls in their room so they can listen to library books, audiobooks from the library and stuff like that. But my son really enjoys listening to metal and stuff like that. And he uses my Spotify account. So sometimes he'll just listen to it from the Google Home, which does work, but he doesn't get his own headphones or whatever. So, we don't really want to give him a full-fledged phone quite yet. So this might be a really nice interim solution.
I might have to check this out because I have a huge phone and I take it running with me. And I have to have this huge thing strapped to my arm in order to run with it. So this looks like they have a lot of their ad copy here. It just has a lot of like fitness folks, like it's a tiny little device that can like clip to your belt, and I'm sure it's pretty lightweight. So that actually might be nice if you're like someone out in the gym or out on a run, and because I need to listen to something, I just can't without listening to something.
Yeah, and the hard part too is because I thought like I could use my Zune and it does work, and I have the software to like sync stuff to it. The problem is that you have to either purchase or find MP3s to like sync to the device. But I already have Spotify and I already pay for it. So what I love about the Mighty 3 is that it just works with your Spotify account, which is exactly what I want. So that's why it seems like it's a good fit for what I need.
Yeah, this is awesome. I'm going to check this out.
All right. Well, time for the Minnesota long goodbye. What are your thoughts on today's episode?
I think my thoughts are, after the holidays here, I think we're kind of in a lull. Security is always perennial. Definitely keep on top of your security posture. I've been really pleased with, speaking of Node.js, with socket.dev for the open source stuff. We've turned on socket.dev for all of our things, and that's been really, really helpful in like spotting issues that I didn't know we had. It's all been like low exploitability stuff, like dev tool stuff. Like if you had a dev server and someone was looking to exploit you specifically, they could attack your dev server, that kind of stuff. Don't deploy dev servers out, by the way. That's not what they're for. But certainly security is perennial here. I'm excited for JavaScript and by extension TypeScript in the future. Like the JavaScript engine zoo was really cool to see. Like the numbers they're posting up there were really amazing. And one thing that kind of excited me is you can actually filter by JIT on here. So you can like look at like what happens if you are filtering by like, oh, I want to look at things that are JIT-less on the top right. And you can see like what is the score here for JIT-less engines, and things kind of pick up a different look. Hermes bubbles to the top, and that's the React Native thing. And for reasons like they need to be JIT-less because they're running on like Apple devices and stuff like that. And the limitation up until very recently, and I think it still kind of is a limitation, more of a limitation from a social reason or like a policy reason than a technical one. But a lot of vendors don't allow JITs because they're potentially a security problem because they emit assembly at runtime.
Mm-hmm.
So Hermes, which powers React Native, is a bytecode interpreter. And they implement just enough of a React and the browser to render React. So very cool stuff.
Yeah, it is pretty sweet. It'll be, I've already bookmarked this so that we can monitor it, like as far as the podcast goes, because if there's new contenders or things like that enter the landscape, it's really nice to just have a single post, a single page to go to see everything. But you can also see like what languages things are written in. There's a lot of Rust in there, a lot of C++ too. So that'll be pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, it's really neat. There was one that kind of caught my eye that I thought might be interesting to the TypeScript community, and that's Engine 262, which has a score of 1, but it's a reference implementation of ECMA 262, which is the JavaScript language. So if you are interested in that, I'll post a link up to this repo on Git, but it's a reference implementation of JavaScript written in TypeScript, which I thought was really interesting.
So what does that mean?
Like if you want to learn how JavaScript works, you can look at this, and it's written in JavaScript.
Cool. Nice. Because I know that most of these engines use test 262 like to test their conformance, but that doesn't mean that they are written like in 262. Is that right?
Yeah. It's 262 is the test suite for JavaScript spec compliance. So like if you implement JavaScript to spec, you should pass the 262.
Okay.
And a lot of these like bespoke JavaScript engines post up their results. For example, Quick.js passes 262. Yeah. So I'll post up a link to that, and I thought that was really cool. What else in the long goodbye here? What are your takeaways?
There's a lot of cool stuff happening. I don't know if I have that much takeaways, to be honest, besides the stuff that we've already kind of have talked about. I just think it'll be interesting to see where things go in 2026. So we'll have to have maybe a bonus episode or something where we talk about what we think for 2026.
Yes, we should do this before 2026 gets too much further along.
Yeah. Yeah. That's all I got.
Awesome.
Cool.
I think that's a show.
Alrighty. We'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.
See you next time. Bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to typescript.fm, where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on Blue Sky. I'm at kamranicus.com, and Eric is at ericonerheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at typescript.fm.